At our final court hearing, my wife's lawyer laughed. "You're about to lose more than just your house." My wife chuckled. I told him he was pathetic. Her friends in the back snickered. I just stood there and said, "You all forgot one very important detail." Minutes later, the judge called for a recess and my wife started crying. I never thought I'd be the kind of man standing in a courtroom, blindsided by betrayal and greed. I never thought I'd be in the kind of marriage where two people went from making plans for retirement to throwing knives in court. But here I am, and I'm writing this because maybe someone out there needs to hear what I learned the hard way. Sometimes the person you love becomes the one who tries the hardest to destroy you. I'm Clark, 48, and I live in Ashland, Oregon. I've always been a quiet person. Not shy, just steady. I work in forest ecology. My days are usually spent studying tree patterns and restoring wildland areas, mostly alone, and I've always been okay with that. Then I met Mira in Portland at a mutual friend's art gallery. She was dazzling. You know the type of person who makes a room feel more alive just by being in it? That was Mira. She curated exhibitions, worked with wealthy patrons, and talked about art like it was religion. I was nothing like the men she usually dated. She told me that, smiling, like it was a compliment. We married 2 years after we met. I left my quiet job and moved to the city for her. Looking back now, it's so clear how one-sided those decisions were. But when you're in it, you tell yourself compromise is love. The first few years were fine. We hosted small dinner parties, went on weekend trips to the coast, and for a while, it felt like we were building something solid. But Myra's world was fast-paced and glittery. She thrived in it. I just floated alongside. After her mother passed, things changed. Mira stopped talking to me, started traveling more. She said she needed space to heal, but healing apparently involved multiple gallery trips with Jasper, a wealthy investor who later turned out to be more than just an investor. I confronted her after I found the receipt. A luxury spa resort in Napa Valley. 1 room, 1 weekend. My name wasn't on it. Jasper's was. She didn't deny it. Instead, she turned it on me. Said I was boring, routine, emotionally cold. She accused me of being checked out for years, of making her feel unseen. I was stunned, not because I thought she was wrong. I'm not exactly a spontaneous thrill seeker, but because of the cruelty in how she said it. Like I deserved it all along. Like her betrayal was my fault. I packed a bag and drove back to Ashland the next day. That was the last time we lived together. Fast forward 7 months, and we're in the middle of divorce proceedings. Mira hired the best divorce attorney in Portland, Russell Greaves, a man with slicked back hair and an ego you could trip over. They didn't just want to end things. They wanted everything. The house, my retirement, even my father's vintage cars. Mira said they were co-marital assets, even though I'd inherited them 10 years before we met. They painted me as a recluse, someone emotionally unavailable who abandoned her. They produced journal entries, statements from therapists, friends' declarations that I was controlling. I'd never heard any of these things during our marriage. I don't know if you've ever sat in a courtroom while someone rewrites your life into something unrecognizable, but it's not anger you feel. It's helplessness, like drowning in a story you didn't write. My lawyer, Joan, was good, but she was outmatched. Greaves had connections. He had an answer for everything. And Mira knew exactly how to look sympathetic. Her tears fell on cue. Her voice trembled at just the right time. I started wondering if I was actually the villain and just hadn't noticed. But something didn't sit right with me. You see, Mira wasn't just attacking me emotionally. She was too eager to hurt me financially. And while she cried in court, she was living well. Too well. I started tracking her activity through our remaining joint financial accounts. Small details didn't add up. Money was disappearing. Transfers to shell accounts. Business ventures that didn't seem real. That's when I hired Felix, a forensic accountant in Bend, Oregon. He wasn't cheap, but he was meticulous. What he found shocked even him. Mira had been siphoning off money into shell companies linked to Jasper. Not just recently, for over a year. Worse, she'd signed financial documents under both her name and, occasionally, Jasper's. If anyone decided to dig, it would look like she was co-conspiring in tax evasion. I waited, sat on it, let the court proceedings play out. Then, on the day of our final hearing, I walked into that courtroom knowing it was my last chance to show who she really was. Her lawyer was practically giddy. He made a show of it, standing tall, announcing how Mr. Beringer stands to lose more than just a house today. Mira chuckled. She didn't even look at me, just whispered to her lawyer and laughed. I told him he was pathetic. Her friends in the back row giggled. Then Joan, calm and quiet as ever, handed the judge the folder. New evidence, Your Honor, she said. Financial disclosures that were not accounted for during the discovery period. The judge raised an eyebrow, opened the folder, and didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he looked up, tight-lipped. We'll take a short recess. I'd like to speak with both counsels in chambers. Mira looked confused. Then she looked scared. She didn't come back into the courtroom for nearly 45 minutes. When she did, her face was blotchy and her hands were shaking. The friends in the back? Gone. Mira sat down and stared at the floor. Greaves didn't speak. The judge cleared his throat. Settlement has been revised. And just like that, everything changed. It would have felt wrong, like celebrating a fire that burned down my life, even if I was the one who walked out of it alive. The courtroom buzzed in silence. That strange energy that happens when no one's sure whether they've just seen a quiet miracle or the beginning of someone else's downfall. I glanced over at Mira. Her shoulders hunched, her face frozen in that expression people wear when they've been caught and can't figure out what to say next. The judge kept his tone even. Due to the late discovery and severity of the new financial evidence, I am granting Mr. Beringer full retention of personal property, including his residence and retirement assets. All claims made by the plaintiff toward those assets are hereby withdrawn. Joan sat beside me, scribbling notes, but I barely heard the rest. It felt like a weight had lifted off my chest, but I wasn't floating. More like I'd finally stood up straight after years of crouching under something I didn't even realize was crushing me. Mira didn't speak a word as the judge wrapped it up. The bailiff called a break for lunch, and people began to shuffle out of the room. I stayed seated for a moment. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd look at me, if she had anything left to say. But her gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Outside, Portland's sky was doing that overcast thing it's famous for. Gray enough to feel like evening, even at midday. I walked down the courthouse steps and felt something between exhaustion and relief. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't want to go home yet. So I went to the one place I always did when I didn't know what to do, Powell's books. Call it habit, or therapy, or just needing to be around things that don't talk back. I wandered the aisles until my phone buzzed. It was Joan. One line. She's negotiating. We might be able to close this today. You'll want to hear it. Back at the courthouse, Joan and I sat in a small room off the main hallway, just the two of us. She laid the terms out like cards on a table. Mira was terrified of a formal investigation. She wanted to avoid criminal charges. She was willing to concede nearly everything. The house, the vehicles, the retirement. She even offered to pay her own legal fees in exchange for me agreeing not to press anything further. She wants a clean escape, Joan said, almost grim. What's she giving up? I asked. Everything, she said plainly. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I didn't know what I wanted. I did. I wanted peace. And I wanted it to hurt for her the way it had hurt for me. But most of all, I wanted to be done. Fine, I said. Let her go. Joan nodded, but something in her eyes told me she hadn't expected me to say yes so quickly. You sure? She asked. You could take this further. File civil charges, open a fraud case. I shook my head. Let her live with it. That's more permanent than anything we could do in court. The formal paperwork didn't take long. The courthouse processed the adjustments in record time, likely because Myra's attorney all but begged them to. I didn't see her again that day. She signed the final agreement in a back room, then slipped out through a side exit. No goodbye, no final exchange. That felt right. But word travels, especially in Myra's world, polished, well-connected, all about image Mira. And once her gallery partners found out the financials had been quietly investigated, she wasn't welcome in their inner circle anymore. A week later, the main gallery downtown removed her name from its upcoming exhibit. Her social media went quiet, then vanished altogether. I drove home that night in silence. No music, no talk radio, just the hum of tires on wet pavement. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no movie ending, just quiet. Back at the house, my house, I stood in the living room for a long time, just looking around. Myra's things were gone, but her ghost still lingered in the details. The scent of a candle she liked. A wine stain on the floor from a party 2 summers ago. Her name carved into a wooden beam by the stairs. I thought about sanding it out, then decided to leave it. Scars tell the truth, even when people don't. I wish I could say everything got better overnight. That I moved on quickly, fell in love, traveled the world. But that's not how real life works, is it? Healing is slow. Some days are good. Some days, I wake up and forget for a second that any of it happened. Then I remember, and I get up anyway. I started working more with students at SOU. Young people who still believed they could fix the world. Their optimism kept me afloat, even when I didn't always share it. And then, months later, I got a letter. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper in handwriting I knew better than my own. You were right. I forgot who I was. And I don't know how to be her again. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some things are meant to be finished quietly. I left the letter on my kitchen table for weeks. It sat under a coaster, partly out of sight, but never out of mind. Some mornings I'd glance at it over coffee. Other days I'd pretend I didn't see it. But I did. I always did. It wasn't the words themselves that haunted me. It was the silence behind them. The Mira I'd known would never have admitted she forgot who she was. She'd have blamed the world, the system, me, anyone. That line in the letter was something else. Something raw. Maybe honest. I didn't know what to do with it. So I did nothing. At least, not right away. Winter came early that year in Ashland. Late October brought frost that settled on the porch railings and coated the grass like powdered sugar. I found myself walking more. just around the property, sometimes down to Lithia Park. There's something about movement that lets the mind untangle itself. The more I walked, the less angry I felt. Not forgiving, just not holding on to it like a knife anymore. People in town started asking how I was. Not in that polite, distant way, but with real curiosity. Word had gotten around. Small towns do that. Some people said they'd always thought Mira was a bit much. Others acted like I'd narrowly escaped a car crash and wanted the full story. I didn't give it to them, not out of pride, but because I was done living in it. Still, every now and then, someone would ask the one question I wasn't ready for. Do you miss her? I didn't have an answer. Not then. In early December, Joan called me. You're not going to like this, she said. I sighed. Go on. Jasper's being indicted. The feds are building a case. Myra's name is showing up in some of the documents. It's early, nothing formal yet, but you should know. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Do I need to do anything? Not unless they come to you, she said. Which they might. You were technically part of some of those transactions, even if you didn't know it. I paused. Would it help if I gave them everything Felix found? Yes, she said. It might help a lot. The next week, 2 men in suits showed up at my door. Not menacing, polite, actually. One was FBI, the other IRS. They showed me their badges, asked if I had a few minutes. I did. We sat in my living room, and I laid it all out. The bank transfers, the gallery shell companies, Felix's reports. They listened, asked questions, took notes. I showed them a copy of the letter. They photographed it, but didn't take it. One of them, the younger one, shook his head slowly as I explained how far it had gone. Did you know she was involved in any of this when it was happening? He asked. I didn't hesitate. No. I thought she was cheating. I had no idea she was laundering. He nodded, scribbled it down. They left after an hour. One of them said they'd be in touch. The next month passed in slow motion. Christmas came and went. I didn't decorate, didn't host anyone, but I didn't feel lonely. It was a quiet holiday, and honestly, that felt like the biggest gift of all. I started teaching more in January. A winter session course at SOU about ecological restoration methods. It was hands-on. We took students out into the forest, taught them how to read the land, how to notice the little things. I saw myself in a few of them. Awkward, overly focused, full of questions. One kid, Jonah, asked me over lunch one day if I'd ever been married. I paused, chewing slowly. Yeah, I said. Didn't work out. He looked at me for a second, then shrugged. Still seems like you've got a good life. It hit me harder than I expected, that this random 21-year-old could see peace in me that I hadn't even recognized yet. Then, in mid-February, another letter arrived. Same handwriting, different tone. It was longer, more structured. Mira had written it like a confession, not the kind you give to be forgiven, but the kind you write when you're finally honest with yourself. She wrote about how she'd fallen into Jasper's world because it made her feel powerful. She wrote about the lies, the greed, the parts of herself she hated, and the ones she missed. She even mentioned the FBI investigation and said she knew it was only a matter of time. At the end, she asked a question. If I lose everything, will that finally make me human again? I read that line over and over. Not because I had the answer, I didn't. But because for the first time since our marriage fell apart, Mira didn't sound like the villain I'd built in my head. She sounded like a person. Flawed, terrified, maybe even sorry. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away, either. It joined the first letter, tucked in the back of my bookshelf behind an old field guide on pine beetles. A strange place for it, I know, but somehow it made sense. Both the trees and the pain had one thing in common. They left scars in layers. Rings in the wood, letters on the shelf. And I wasn't done healing yet. March came with snow that didn't stick, and days that felt longer than they should have. I filled my time with small rituals, pruning trees in the yard, sorting old tools in the shed, writing down field notes I'd ignored for years. Nothing urgent, just tasks that gave shape to the silence. The stillness wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had become a kind of companion, a soft, steady presence I could finally sit with. Then I got a call from Felix, the forensic accountant. I just got off a call with a federal investigator, he said. They're moving forward. Full case. Grand jury's already been set. Jasper's being indicted. It's not official yet, but Myra's being listed as a co-conspirator. I closed my eyes and ran a hand over my jaw. She knew it was coming, I said. Felix didn't say anything for a second. They may contact you again. If you're called to testify, you okay with that? I thought about it. The years I'd spent loving Mira. The unraveling. The lies. And now, the idea of sitting in a courtroom, not for my own defense this time, but as someone pointing the finger. I'll tell the truth, I said. That's all I can do. That truth turned out to be more complicated than I expected. A few weeks later, the federal prosecutor handling the case requested a video deposition. I wasn't technically required to give it. Not yet, but they wanted my perspective on the financial activity, how I discovered it, and what I believed Myra's intentions were. I sat in Joan's office, in front of a camera, with a glass of water I barely touched. She didn't start out like that, I said at one point. She loved what she did. She loved creating things. Galleries, exhibits, spaces people could walk into and feel something. Somewhere along the line, that turned into needing power. Money. Validation. I don't think she even noticed the shift. The interviewer asked if I thought Mira was remorseful. I paused for a long time. She knows what she did, I said. And she knows it cost her everything. That's got to live somewhere in her. Whether it's remorse or just regret. I don't know. That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of everything. Not just the marriage or the trial, but the sheer amount of living that had taken place between us sat in my chest like stone. I thought about writing her a letter. Not to rekindle anything. Just to answer the question she'd asked. About losing everything and becoming human again. But I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't trust my words to land where they were meant to. And some things are meant to stay in the quiet. In April, I got an email from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade. Taryn, one of Myra's oldest friends. We'd gotten along during the early years, even stayed in touch for a while before everything soured. Subject line, just checking in. The message was short. Hey Clark, I heard what's going on. I don't know how much of it is real and how much is rumor, but I wanted to tell you something. Myra's not doing great. She's alone in New York now. Her lawyer dropped her after the grand jury notice. She doesn't talk to many people anymore. I'm not writing for her. I just thought you should know. For whatever it's worth. Take care. Tara and I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was surprised, but because it hit differently hearing it from someone else. Knowing Mira wasn't just losing her career, but her circle, her stability, her identity. The person who had laughed at me in court was now living in silence. Probably fearing a knock at the door every time the mail came. I didn't reply to Taryn. There wasn't anything to say. But the next morning, I took the letters from the shelf, laid them on the table, and read them again. This time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I just felt tired. The next unexpected thing came in the form of a knock on my door. Mid-May, early morning. I figured it was a delivery. I'd ordered some new boots. But when I opened the door, there she was. Mira, wearing a coat too light for the morning chill, holding a small leather bag, looking nothing like the woman I'd last seen in court. Her face was pale. No makeup. No air of confidence. Just a question behind her eyes. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. She stood there for a few seconds before quietly asking, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around like the house belonged to someone else. In some ways, I guess it did. I'd changed things since she left. New curtains, new chairs, no photos. Still, there were pieces she'd touched once. I saw her notice them. Saw her face shift. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said after a moment. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't offer her tea or a seat. I just stood there, trying to figure out what this moment was, an apology, a collapse, or something else entirely. "Why now?" I asked. She looked down, rubbed her hands together. "Because I'm being indicted next week." And I realized, there's no one left who knows the whole truth. No one who saw me before all of this. I nodded slowly. "I didn't come here to fix anything," she added. "I'm past that. I just thought maybe I owed it to both of us not to disappear without saying something real." I sat down then, not for her, but because my knees were suddenly tired. She sat too, across from me. Not close, not comfortable, but there. And in the quiet that followed, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not closure, just honesty. We sat in that quiet for what felt like a full minute. Not the tense kind, not charged, just heavy, like both of us were waiting to see who would flinch first. Mira was the one to speak. "I don't expect you to feel sorry for me," she said. "And I don't want you to. I just didn't want the last thing between us to be silence." I looked at her, really looked at her. And she wasn't the woman who'd mocked me in court, flanked by her giggling friends and smirking lawyer. She looked smaller, worn, like someone who had finally learned how heavy consequences really are. "You came here to tell me you were human," I said flatly. "I came here because I'm alone," she replied. "And because I was wrong." That part didn't hit the way I thought it would. I wasn't waiting for her apology anymore. I'd done the hard work of healing without it. "I tried to ruin you," she added, voice quieter. "I was so angry at you for being steady, for not losing control. I wanted to break that part of you, but it didn't work." There it was, the moment of clarity. Not for her, for me, because I finally realized something. I had already won. Mira stayed for an hour. She talked more than I did, about the indictment, about Jasper, about how she'd moved to a tiny apartment in the Bronx and started substitute teaching art classes at public schools because nobody in her old world would return her calls. She told me the gallery community in New York had all but blacklisted her after whispers of her involvement in Jasper's scheme spread. Jasper had turned on her. Filed papers suggesting she was the mastermind. Classic. I didn't tell her I already knew all that. Felix had been keeping me updated. She cried a little. Not dramatically. Just one of those quiet weeps people do when they're past shame and just exhausted. Then she asked me if I hated her. I told her no. Because I didn't. But that didn't mean I owed her anything. And that was the moment. That was my revenge. Not because I had hurt her, but because I had become untouchable. I should go, she said, standing up and wiping her face. I nodded. She paused at the door. I hope. I hope you find someone. I know I didn't make it easy to love you, but someone will. I didn't reply. She didn't expect me to. She stepped outside, then turned back. I was wrong about you. You were never boring. You were just whole. And I never was. Then she left. 2 weeks later, the indictment went public. Jasper was charged with wire fraud, tax evasion, and falsifying charitable donation records. Mira was named as a knowing participant, but thanks to the information I provided early on and her cooperation afterward, she got a reduced sentence, 2 years of probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory financial ethics counseling. No prison, no orange jumpsuit. But she'd never hold a financial or executive role again. Her professional life, the one she had built her entire self around, was over. And I was asked to testify in a deposition, then thanked by the federal attorneys for my early help. Felix even got mentioned in a federal report as a key contributor. I kept the house, the retirement, and the cars. But more than that, I kept my peace. About a month after the indictment, I got another letter. This one was typed. Formal. From a small arts nonprofit in Portland that had bought out Myra's former gallery after its bankruptcy. They wanted to invite me to an upcoming event, an outdoor exhibit in Lithia Park, honoring local resilience and community contributions. Apparently, Mira, in her post-collapse soul-searching, had anonymously nominated me for helping expose financial corruption in the arts and preserving community trust. They didn't know she'd been my ex-wife. I declined the spotlight, of course, but I did attend, quietly, anonymously. I stood in the back as they lit lanterns, listened as people spoke about integrity and accountability, and watched as younger artists got recognized for their work. It felt like a full circle. As I left, one of the coordinators, a woman in her mid-30s named Naomi, stopped me. Were you one of the silent donors? For the legal aid fund, she asked. No, I said. Just someone who believes in rebuilding things the right way. She smiled, and we talked for a bit. Nothing serious, but it felt like the beginning of something honest. I haven't seen Mira since that day at my door. Sometimes I still think about her, but not with bitterness. More like how you remember a storm that passed through and changed the shape of your roof. You don't curse the clouds forever. You just fix the beams and make the house stronger. She lost everything she fought for, not because I took it from her, but because she built it on hollow ground. And I walked away with everything that mattered, not just the house or the assets, but my name, my self-respect, my truth. That's the thing about revenge. You don't always have to swing the sword. Sometimes the best revenge is being the one who heals, who moves on, who lives well, and lets them sit in the ruins of their own choices.